Imagine living in a country that calls itself the land of the free, yet freedom feels just out of reach. Minister Louis Farrakhan challenges us to think deeply about what love truly means. He argues that love without freedom, justice, and equality is hollow, a word without action, a promise without follow-through. For generations, 70 black people in America have poured their sweat, blood, and brilliance into building this nation, only to face systems that deny them full justice and equality. Farrakhan doesn't just speak. He shines a light on the uncomfortable truth that reconciliation and harmony are meaningless when the foundation is still unbalanced. In this rare interview, he cuts through decades of distortion and misrepresentation, offering a voice that has often been silenced or twisted by the media. What he says isn't just about himself, it's a reflection of centuries of stolen labor, unacknowledged pain, and a demand for accountability. He reminds us that real love, real respect, and real equality require action, not just empty words. As you watch, you'll see why his message has resonated with thousands, drawing attention not through anger, but through clarity, memory, and truth. This is a moment to reflect, to question, and to understand the legacy that shapes our present. If you want more thought-provoking insights like this, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. Join us as we explore voices that challenge the status quo, tell untold stories, and inspire action. Don't miss a single moment. Your journey to understanding begins here. From the very beginning of his public life, Minister Louis Farrakhan has been navigating a world that seems determined not to hear him, a society eager to distort what he says in order to maintain comfort for those in power. He repeatedly points out that the press, in its relentless pursuit of controversy, selects fragments of his speech, twists his words, and presents them out of context, painting him not as a messenger of reflection or accountability, but as a threat, a provocateur, or an extremist. Each sentence he utters is examined under a lens calibrated for fear rather than understanding, a mirror designed to magnify discomfort and minimize truth. What Farrakhan speaks is rooted in history, in the centuries of unpaid labor and stolen lives of black people in America. Yet the very institutions tasked with informing the public instead reduce his message to soundbites that strip it of context, leaving only what shocks or frightens the audience. He describes this process not as a personal grievance, but as a systemic pattern, one that mirrors the mechanisms of oppression that have existed for generations. When black leaders speak with authority, when they demand justice or shine a light on structural inequities, their voices are reframed as dangerous. The media, consciously or unconsciously, amplifies fear, portraying accountability as aggression, sorrow as resentment, and self-determination as radicalism. Farrakhan has seen this cycle repeat itself over decades, from the misrepresentation of his early speeches to the distortion of his interviews, where questions are often posed not to seek understanding but to trap, twist, or force a narrative that confirms pre-existing biases. In recounting these experiences, he does not lash out. He speaks with precision and calm, showing a mastery of communication that forces the listener to confront the deeper truths behind the headlines. He exposes how selective framing functions as a modern-day overseer, echoing the psychological chains once imposed on enslaved Africans, chains that dictated which words could be spoken, which stories could be told, and whose pain could be acknowledged. In the same way that history has often denied black suffering or treated it as isolated incidents, the press continues to fragment and reframe, separating context from consequence and reducing complex human experience to controversy. Farrakhan's insistence on truthfulness is not simply about defending himself. It is about reclaiming the narrative that has been stolen, about giving voice to histories and experiences systematically ignored or misrepresented. He reminds his audience that the misrepresentation of black truth is not a series of accidents but a tool, a deliberate way to maintain the comfort of those who benefit from inequality. Every edited clip, every sensational headline, every carefully curated soundbite functions as a subtle assertion of power, reinforcing the boundaries within which black voices are expected to operate, silencing the inconvenient, and highlighting the agreeable. Yet despite the constant distortions and the framing designed to provoke suspicion or fear, Farrakhan continues to speak openly, refusing to dilute his words for the sake of white comfort or media approval. He does not seek approval. He seeks understanding, a recognition that the experiences of black people in America are not hypothetical, nor are they rhetorical devices for shock value. They are real, lived, and consequential, and he insists that the world listen without the filter of selective fear, in weaving together history, personal observation, and moral reasoning. Farrakhan challenges the audience to question not only the narrative they are presented, but the systems that produce it, demanding a reckoning with the ways in which truth is packaged, delivered, and ultimately received in a society structured to overlook injustice. Through this unbroken thread, the story of Louis Farrakhan becomes inseparable from the story of Black America itself, a continuous struggle to speak truth in a world that too often prefers silence, a battle to reclaim dignity in the face of deliberate misrepresentation, and an enduring insistence that real justice, understanding, and equality begin with listening without prejudice. Throughout his speeches and interviews, Minister Louis Farrakhan weaves a narrative that exposes the stark double standards embedded in society, a world in which the actions of the oppressed are criminalized while the violence of the powerful is normalized, justified, and even celebrated. He illustrates. So, with piercing clarity, that black resistance you heather, it is a march, a protest, or a call for justice is instantly labeled as terrorism by mainstream institutions, the media, and political authorities, framed as a threat to national security or public order, whereas systemic violence carried out by governments, law enforcement, or Western powers is routinely cast as legitimate policy, a necessary measure for peace, or the protection of civilization. This contradiction is not incidental, but deeply rooted in historical patterns of control, fear, and the preservation of hierarchy, where the very act of demanding equality becomes a narrative threat to those in power, a threat that must be contained, misrepresented, or condemned. Farrakhan recounts countless instances where the same actor group of people standing together to demand fairness, or defending their community from oppression is interpreted through two radically different lenses depending on the identity of those involved. When the people are black, their courage is twisted into danger. When the state wields force, it is reframed as strategy, patriotism, or law and order. He highlights the irony that protests against injustice, which emerge from the most vulnerable and historically oppressed communities, are systematically criminalized, their leaders surveilled, their messages distorted, and their humanity questioned, while entire campaigns of violence, wars of intervention, or acts of police brutality are justified in the language of policy and security. In his telling, this is not a question of isolated events, but of a persistent framework designed to maintain dominance. A system that controls perception through selective narrative, allowing the powerful to act with impunity while discouraging those without power from resisting. Through stories and historical context, Farrakhan draws the listener into a deeper understanding of the consequences of this imbalance. He reminds his audience that centuries of oppression were not merely physical but psychological, shaping how society perceives acts of self-preservation, self-determination, and organized resistance. The labeling of black activism as terrorism is more than rhetoric. It is a continuation of centuries-old mechanisms intended to intimidate, suppress, and delegitimize voices that demand equity, echoing the era when any assertion of autonomy by enslaved people or colonized nations was met with brutal punishment and systemic erasure. Meanwhile, the violence of dominant powers is sanitized, recorded as history, strategy, or necessary action, creating a false equivalence that masks the unequal realities of accountability, consequence, and morality. Farrakhan does not merely critique these disparities from afar. He examines the emotional and societal toll of this selective framing. He underscores that when resistance is criminalized while state violence is excused, a profound injustice takes root not only in law but in collective consciousness, normalizing fear of the oppressed and acceptance of exploitation. Communities internalize these messages, young people learn caution in place of courage, and society as a whole becomes complicit in a narrative that discourages empathy for those most affected by systemic harm. Yet Farrakhan emphasizes resilience, urging listeners to recognize that truth cannot be negated by narrative distortion and that the reality of oppression, injustice, and resistance exists independently of labels or propaganda. By connecting historical patterns to present-day realities, he challenges audiences to confront uncomfortable truths about the world they inhabit, to question why courage and protest are demonized in some contexts while sanctioned violence is excused in others, and to understand that the fight for justice is inseparable from the battle over perception. In this light, Farrakhan's message transcends individual critique. It becomes a meditation on power, narrative, and morality, showing that the struggle for black liberation is a fight not only against physical oppression, but against the distortion of truth, a fight to reclaim dignity, agency, and the ability to exist without having one's very resistance framed as a threat to civilization. Farrakhan's words cut through the surface of public discourse to reveal the persistent reality of black suffering in America, a reality that is systemic, deeply rooted, and ongoing rather than simply a matter of historical footnotes or rhetorical flourishes. He paints a vivid picture of a society in which generations of oppression, deprivation, and violence are treated as mere background noise, while other historical traumas, often distant or symbolic, are memorialized with solemn reverence and national reflection. In his narrative, the pain experienced by black communities from the legacy of slavery to segregation, from economic disenfranchisement to contemporary forms of discrimination is not occasional or isolated, but woven into the very structures of law, policy, and culture, a continuous thread that shapes opportunity, perception, and value. He contrasts the acknowledgement of tragedies that do not challenge systemic power with the dismissal of black suffering, highlighting how the stories of oppression that demand accountability are often minimized, distorted, or rendered invisible, while others are amplified as lessons in morality or progress. Through this lens, Farrakhan shows how society chooses whose suffering is worthy of attention and whose is convenient to ignore, creating a hierarchy of pain that reinforces the existing power dynamics. He recounts experiences, both historical and contemporary, illustrating the everyday realities of communities living under constant scrutiny, surveillance, and threat, and how these pressures compound over time to create a pervasive sense of marginalization. He emphasizes that this is not a rhetorical argument or an abstract complaint, but a lived experience that impacts education, economic opportunity, decent, health, and safety, shaping lives from childhood onward. The suffering of black Americans is systemic, embedded in laws, policies, and social practices that perpetuate inequity and normalize injustice, and yet it is often dismissed in public discourse as exaggeration or grievance. Farrakhan challenges audiences to confront the moral dissonance of a society that can honor certain tragedies while simultaneously downplaying others, noting that the failure to recognize the depth and continuity of black suffering allows structural inequality to persist unchallenged. He explores the psychological and cultural consequences of this dismissal, showing how generations grow up, internalizing the message that their pain is less legitimate, their voice is less credible, and their demands for justice less urgent. In juxtaposition, he points to historical events that are commemorated and mourned with ceremony and scholarship, underscoring the selective memory that prioritizes some narratives over others and thereby sustains inequality. By connecting systemic suffering to media misrepresentation, criminalization of resistance, and normalized state violence, Farrakhan constructs a comprehensive critique of the forces that sustain inequality, revealing a pattern in which acknowledgement, empathy, and justice are selectively applied. He illustrates that the true weight of black suffering cannot be captured in headlines, soundbites, or political platitudes, but must be understood in the context of a society that continuously measures value and legitimacy through the lens of power. In this way, his message becomes both a historical account and a moral imperative, urging recognition of lived realities, insistence on systemic change, and an honest reckoning with the disparities that have been ignored, minimized, or erased for far too long. By framing black suffering as ongoing, deeply rooted, and intertwined with structural injustice, Farrakhan challenges society to confront truths that are uncomfortable yet essential, calling for a recognition that justice cannot be granted through selective memory or symbolic gestures, but must be pursued through genuine equality, accountability, and acknowledgement of the realities that have long been denied. Farrakhan's vision for addressing the deep-rooted inequities faced by black communities moves beyond critique and condemnation, centering instead on empowerment, self-determination, and the creation of structures that nurture autonomy and resilience. He presents a narrative in which true freedom cannot be achieved through reliance on systems that have historically marginalized black people, because those systems, shaped by centuries of oppression, are inherently incapable of delivering justice or equity. Instead, he emphasizes the transformative power of building and sustaining black-owned institution schools that educate children in environments that affirm their history and potential, businesses that circulate wealth within the community, and organizations that provide social, cultural, and economic support, creating a self-reinforcing ecosystem of strength and opportunity. In his words, unity and collective investment are not abstract ideals but practical tools to counteract systemic neglect, to reclaim agency, and to cultivate a future in which black people can thrive on their own terms, without dependency on external validation or approval. He narrates the story of communities that have suffered from the long shadow of systemic oppression, and then illuminates the possibilities that emerge when they organize around shared purpose and common goals, illustrating how economic independence fosters not only material well-being but also cultural pride and social cohesion. Farrakhan stresses that when black communities control their own schools, they can teach history honestly, instill confidence, and develop leaders who are equipped to navigate both the challenges and opportunities of the wider society without compromising their identity or values. Similarly, black-owned businesses serve as engines of empowerment, generating employment, mentorship, and capital that remain within the community, creating a tangible counterbalance to centuries of economic disenfranchisement. Institutions built by and for black people, from cultural centers to social programs, are portrayed as vital conduits for knowledge, resources, and solidarity. Strengthening the social fabric while providing practical avenues for advancement. Farrakhan weaves this vision into the broader context of systemic inequality, connecting the pursuit of economic and social self-sufficiency to the recognition of historical and ongoing injustices. He portrays black unity not merely as a philosophical aspiration, but as a strategic imperative, emphasizing that isolated efforts are insufficient in the face of entrenched structures of power and oppression. Through the establishment of institutions under community control, individuals gain access to resources, mentorship, and networks that are often denied by mainstream systems, enabling them to cultivate skills, build generational wealth, and participate fully in societal development while retaining autonomy over their cultural and economic destiny. His narrative situates this approach within the continuum of resistance, linking it to the broader struggle for recognition, justice, and human dignity, highlighting that self-determination and unity are not reactive measures but proactive strategies that empower communities to define their own path. He underscores that black empowerment does not exist in opposition to others but as a necessary reclamation of agency, identity, and opportunity that has been historically denied, emphasizing that the development of black-owned schools, businesses, and institutions creates a foundation for sustainable progress, resilience, and intergenerational strength. By presenting a compelling story of empowerment grounded in unity, Farrakhan challenges his audience to envision a future where black communities are architects of their own destiny, where resources, knowledge, and opportunity circulate within the community, and where systemic inequities are met not with despair, but with strategic, collective action designed to ensure that justice, dignity, and prosperity are accessible to all who have long been marginalized. As the conversation draws to a close, Farrakhan's reflections leave a lasting impression, emphasizing the courage and conviction required to lead from a black perspective in a society that often misinterprets confidence as hostility. Throughout the interview, he illustrates the double standard that permeates public perception. When black leaders speak with authority and clarity, articulating the realities of their communities and demanding justice, their words are too often labeled as threatening or extreme, while similar expressions from other groups are normalized or celebrated. Farrakhan refuses to temper his message to appease critics or fit into narratives that deny truth. demonstrating that integrity and unwavering commitment to one's community are essential in the pursuit of equality and self-determination. His stance serves as both a challenge and an inspiration, calling on Black audiences to embrace their voice, assert their perspective, and resist the pressure to apologize for advocating for justice, empowerment, and collective progress. The interview captures a broader lesson about leadership, courage, and the responsibility of those in positions of influence. Farrakhan reminds listeners that speaking the truth is not a matter of aggression, but of accountability and vision, and that constructive criticism must never discourage communities from asserting their rights and identity. He contextualizes this message within the ongoing struggle for social, economic, and cultural empowerment, linking personal confidence to collective action, and illustrating how strong leadership can inspire change, nurture resilience, and transform systems that have long perpetuated inequity. By refusing to soften his words, he models a form of leadership grounded in authenticity, knowledge, and unwavering dedication, demonstrating that true guidance comes not from pleasing others, but from serving one's community with clarity, strength, and purpose. As we reflect on the insights shared, it becomes clear that the path toward empowerment is intertwined with courage, unity, and the willingness to challenge narratives that distort truth. Farrakhan's message is not just for one moment or one audience. It is a call to action, urging Black individuals and communities to cultivate confidence, invest in their institutions, and recognize the transformative power of self-determination through leadership that is informed, unapologetic, and committed to justice. Communities can reclaim agency, foster solidarity, and create opportunities that extend far beyond individual achievement, building a legacy of resilience, pride, and collective progress. Thank you for watching and engaging with this conversation. If you found these insights meaningful and want to explore more stories that highlight truth, empowerment, and leadership, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue sharing powerful narratives that matter and amplifying voices that inspire change, reminding us all of the importance of courage, authenticity, and unity in shaping a better future.